So I'd now like to invite Marta Valinas, the chair of the International Fact-Finding Mission, to present the oral update. You have the floor, madam. Thank you, President. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. The International Fact-Finding Mission on the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela is pleased to have this opportunity to present an oral update on its work pursuant to Resolution 45/20 adopted by the Council in September 2020. The mission presented its first report giving details of extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, arbitrary detention and torture, as well as cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment, including sexual and gender-based violence committed by state agents of Venezuela since 2014. We believe there are reasonable grounds to believe that some of the acts described in that report are crimes against humanity. In our second report presented in September 2021, we focused our inquiries on the response of the judicial system to human rights violations and crimes documented by the mission. We concluded that stakeholders have played an important role in state repression, either through their actions or lack of them, against government opponents and persons who are perceived as government opponents. President, the government has announced they'll take measures to tackle impunity in Venezuela. What's really important, though, is implementing these measures and recognizing that there is a situation of impunity is already a step in the right direction. Shortly after the publication of our second report, the government signed a memorandum of understanding with the Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC, committing to adopt the necessary measures to ensure effective administration of justice in the country in line with international standards. That's an important opportunity for victims to have access to justice. At the end of last October, Attorney General Tariq William Saab gave an update on progress made by the Public Prosecutor's Office to tackle human rights violations committed by state security officials. He stated that since taking office, 185 people have been convicted for such violations. Nevertheless, as the mission has pointed out, the lack of disaggregated data and key information about the crimes or the rank of the perpetrators continues to be an obstacle to assess the state's true efforts to investigate and pursue these violations. Nevertheless, there has been progress in emblematic cases investigated by the mission. In December of 2021, an intelligence services detective and inspector were convicted for the negligent murder and similar charges which they pleaded guilty to, connected to Fernando Alban's death in 2018. These officials were low in rank and were sentenced to 5 years and 10 months. In February of this year, the 10th Chamber of the Caracas Appeal Court cut their sentences to 2 years and 8 months, and they remained or were released. On the 4th of February 2021, the 12th Criminal Control Court sentenced 2 military intelligence officers to 30 years for torture and homicide with malice aforethought connected to the death of Captain Arevalo. A previous sentence against the 2 men was annulled, though. We reiterate that human rights violations, victims and their family members have the right to take place in judicial proceedings, as is set out in domestic law, but it wasn't respected in the above cases. We would like to reiterate our concern set out in our reports that investigations at national level do not have a large scope, and they focus on low-ranking officials. The above cases are examples of this. This is why we're extending our investigations to higher ranks in the command chain. We'll present our conclusions to the Council in September. We're also looking at the underlying interests which could have motivated violations and crimes. We need concerted efforts, President, to tackle structural problems from the lack of judicial independence, interference of politicians in the justice system. We'll give a detailed description of these problems in our upcoming report. Since August last year, the National Assembly announced that it will carry out a number of reforms in the judicial system. We believe that this is not enough, though, if it's not properly implemented. As part of the package, lawmakers amended 19 articles of the Criminal Procedure Code, reducing a number of deadlines in criminal procedures, including the limit of pretrial detention, in line with Article 230. In line with the amendments, we've registered some positive developments in cases that we've investigated. Nevertheless, there are dozens of people who have been in prison without a trial for over 3 years, and that's way beyond the legal limit. Furthermore, in the second half of last year, 2 people died in custody. They were government opponents, or perceived as such. They did not have access to medical care. One of them was General Baduel, whose case has been documented by the mission before. His son is still held in the Intelligence Services detention facility and is in poor health. He requires immediate medical care. We're worried that persons identified in previous reports have not received appropriate medical care despite our repeated requests. For example, Emma Lindris Benitez, who's one of the women who is detained in connection with the drones case and subject to torture, has not had effective medical care. As a result, her health has worsened significantly, and she is now in a wheelchair. Part of these reforms includes the National Assembly's adoption last year of a law which creates the Commission for guaranteeing justice and reparations for victims of human rights crimes. It's not yet in force, and it only gives the Commission limited power to oversee investigations and to make recommendations. Furthermore, the Commission's members are all appointed by the National Assembly, jeopardizing their political independence. In our last report, we expressed our concern about political influence on the appointment of judges. In January of this year, the National Assembly adopted reforms to the organic law of the Supreme Court of Justice. Unfortunately, they actually increase political influence on the judiciary. For example, the balance in the makeup of the committee of one of the committees of the judiciary now has the majority of its members coming from the National Assembly, more so than from civil society. And furthermore, we've seen that the second transitional article has been reformed, but it means that current magistrates or judges in the Supreme Court can stand again because there's a new selection procedure, which means to say that they'll serve for more than the 12-year limit set out in the Constitution. In the end of October last year, the public prosecutor drew up a plan to appoint provisional prosecutors. Even though this plan is a step in the right direction, if properly implemented, the mission has noted that it only affects prosecutors who are already serving and doesn't adopt measures to ensure access to the prosecutor's career through a public competition. It doesn't provide solutions to other problems within the prosecution service, which we identified in our 2021 report. President, we've also seen some improvements in the transferring people away from the intelligence services detention centres in line with the presidential decree from May 2021. Nevertheless, we're worried that some government opponents, real or perceived, have not been transferred. We're also worried that there are some people still being transferred to Bolivarian. One of them, persons being held in the Intelligence Services El Helicoide detention facility is Javier Tarazona, the director of an NGO, Fundaredes, who was arrested in July last year and accused of terrorism and incitement to hatred. The mission's received information that he's been subject to torture, including psychological torture. We're also worried about the journalist Roland Carreño, who's being held in El Helicoide despite irregularities in his case. We're worried about Juan Carlos Marufo and Maria Auxiliadora Delgado. We set out our concerns in our last report. They were arbitrarily detained in 2019 and they're still being held in La Boleita despite a number of transfer requests. The fact-finding mission also raised concerns about the case of Orlando Moreno. He's a well-known opposition figure and human rights activist. He was arrested in 2017 and charged with possession of an explosive device, which carries a penalty of 2 to 5 years. He was released conditionally in 2017. He filed a complaint for torture while in detention. He was not requested to confirm that complaint until September 2021. A few days later, 4 years after the initial allegations, he was notified that 2017 case against him would go to a preliminary hearing and later to trial. The trial is ongoing. We're worried that his case may be an example of the use of the justice system as a tool to persecute government opponents. On the 10th of December 2021, Juan Carlos Guillén, who defends a number of persons who are being held on political grounds, was arrested. He was held incommunicado for 13 days, and his family didn't know where he was. He is the lawyer of Reyes Hernandez Gonzalez, who was arrested and held in the DGCIM's facilities in 2017. He was recently released. He's claimed he was tortured before being released, and later both his lawyer and the judge that ordered his release were arrested by the same body, both of them being held in pretrial detention. They're accused of corruption. Today, President, Venezuelans suffer the effects of a deep economic, humanitarian, human rights crisis in their daily lives, as well as the deterioration of state institutions. This has all been made worse by the COVID-19 pandemic. The clearest reflection of this is the 6 million people who've felt the need to leave the country. Despite the fact that we've called for Venezuelan authorities' cooperation over 2 years, we've been ignored. We'll continue to work independently, impartially, objectively and thoroughly in order to build a body of information which is credible and which will be presented to the Council in September this year. We urge the members of the Human Rights Council to carry on paying careful attention to events in Venezuela and to check if there is really credible progress in the area of justice, accountability and respect for human rights. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ms. Patricia Tapodarades to answer the questions and comments that have been raised in this part of the discussion.
Señor Presidente.
Thank you, President. The mandate of the Council is specific, and we've followed that in our reports and oral updates. The presence of the OHCHR has shown the worrying situation, has offered cooperation and managed to visit some opposition, individuals from the opposition or who have been arbitrarily deprived of their liberty. But there are serious violations that we haven't been able to detail sufficiently or find out more about. So I will answer the questions that I can from the international community. States can further contribute to supporting these additional mandates that have distinct characters. They can reiterate support in moving forward with trying to amend structures of the state, the security system, and ensure that they maintain the international level of international scrutiny that allows us to continue to pursue our fact-finding mission. accountability of perpetrators of crimes and access to justice for victims a number of years ago became standards in the field of human rights for everybody, but particularly for those who are victims, so that they know that the justice system is operating and that their guarantees can be safeguarded. This requires assistance, cooperation, and greater investigation. Thank you, Chairman.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Ms. Tabata. Mr. Cox, please. Thank you. First, I'd like to express my gratitude for this opportunity to answer questions. I'll refer briefly to the comments from the distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. The reference reminded me of another kind of aggression.
Informes estarían sustentados.
Surface and the basis of creating aggression on a secondary source, but the thing is that these sources are secondary sources because direct victims of arbitrary detention and torture are secondary sources. Also, witnesses are secondary sources. But the whole justice system is not exactly buttressed by these secondary sources. So there's also the barrier of entry to the country. This barrier stems from the decision of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. So you see, the condition is established and then it is used as an argument against us. However, our conclusions are so robust, so clearly documented, that they can be used as a foundation by the Office of the International Criminal Court to move from a preliminary examination to an investigation. Thus, we, and not just us, but also the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, believes that there is a solid basis for an argument and not just on the basis of secondary sources. With a view to replying to some comments from the distinguished representatives, a comment from the European Union, I'd like to say that the priorities we are seeing for the next 6 months will include an analysis of the structure and the chain of command for those violations that we have identified in the first report. In addition, we will try to explore this in other areas of the region, and this by way of a reply to the distinguished representative from the United Kingdom. We will see in different regions of the country, particularly in some border areas, where we've found violations within the remit of our mandate. As to the question from Canada, we will continue to document gender-based violence, sexual harassment, sexual violations. To reply to Sweden's comment, and how can the international community help ensure that there is justice and a fair trial, what can be done is to support the various mandates, notably the mechanisms within the Council, but rather than a airy-fairy mission, this is a mission that has been established by the Council itself. So as regards the mandates and the issue of due process and an impartial investigation and trial, we fulfill a dual function in parallel and complementing the fact-finding mission and the Office of the High Commissioner that we are constantly cooperating with. There are also the reforms that have been announced regarding the mission. On the table we have this detailed analysis of, and we'll be providing greater detail on how the justice system operates. I have a question then from the Czech Republic. That by way of reply to the Czech Republic. From the comment from Poland, we didn't follow that discussion, but we take note of that important issue. As regards the comment from the delegate of Switzerland and our cooperation with the International Criminal Court, as independent bodies, both the Office of the Prosecutor and ourselves, we do not have any formal cooperation in place, but our documents are public, and we have asked each interviewee if they are prepared for us to submit their witness accounts if it is required formally by the Prosecution Service of the International Criminal Court, and each one agreed to do so. To date, we don't yet have an official request. Turning to the questions from the distinguished representative of Peru, we do not have an opinion on the negotiation because that's not within our mandate, and this is a political process. That being said, what we can say is that in any negotiating process, human rights need to be present. They need to be at the core of the negotiation. We've seen on the agenda, the first issue is to try to reform the justice system. And if we were to take into account our second report when we have our analysis of the operation and the problems that we will detail as a basis. Then finally, to answer Amnesty's question on violations of human rights, we haven't been able to comment on that yet because freedom of expression is an issue we haven't been able to detail, and I'd like to have an opportunity to be able to provide some details on that. There's also the issue of reparations or remedies, the question raised by the USA. This is an issue of concern to us, and it's therefore also something we would like to be able to provide written documentation on and some guidelines as to what kind of reparations could be provided to victims of violations of human rights. Then turning to sexual exploitation and human trafficking in some areas, those are also issues of concern to us. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you.